Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Part two in our sort of the ethics of building a house series, if you will. And first, I would like to say thank you very much to the people who left the many kind comments on the first one. I realize this is sort of out of my normal sort of mode, but I do think hopefully the philosophical element of this will become clearer with each episode. I'll sort of increase it from slightly less technical to more philosophical, because I think that sort of gives a better picture of what I'm trying to drive at with the notion of thinking about what it means to build a home, why we might want to do that. And I've been using the word house, but I think that I was thinking about this is probably inaccurate. What we really want to do is we want to build a home. And most people already have a house, right? As I mentioned last time, if you are in the position to have the resources to build a custom home, then you almost certainly have a house. You have some place to live. But what you're trying to do is construct something that more fully reflects your idea of yourself, your idea of how you want to live, who you want to be in the world, how you want to interact with other people, the kinds of opportunities you want to create, this whole, possibility. It's a big work of art, just, a simple way to put it. And this is not a house. That's a home, right? What we're describing is that very different concept of a place that, embodies us, is our history, is our ideals, is our condition. And has that sense of safety and protection and inspiration and rest and all the positive vibes that we tend to associate with the word house or home, as opposed to the word house, which is just sort of a dwelling, a place where you are. And so I think this is important to keep in mind, because as we look at part two, which is where is the owner builder, where the owner takes on the role of the general construction director or the general contractor, as a way to participate more fully in the creation of their dream. And nothing I say, by the way, should be taken to be discourage people from doing this. I think it's an interesting concept, and I think the more fully one engages in the creation of a space, a living space, a house, the more likely it is to become a home. However, it's important to understand what this means, so that people can, what kind of responsibilities and tensions one is taking on. Because, as I mentioned in the first one, the goal of the homeowner, the person who wants to live in this new space, and their architect perhaps, is different from, their motivations are different from the contractor. And when one is both the homeowner and the contractor, that they there's enough problems already, and then they take on this extra burden, which actually sort of puts them against themselves, splits them against themselves, sort of schizophrenic in a bit. This creates this internal tension between the desires and drives and outcomes that the homeowner wants versus the drives, desires that the contractor wants. And when you take on both roles, then you're sort of creating this potential world of tension. However, the plus side is the more you participate in the creation of a space, the more it is yours, the more you feel it. And so again, this is not a way to discourage people from doing this, just to help them understand what the process entails. And again, this is primarily within an American context, and even the United States. There's literally thousands of jurisdictions, and so your mileage may vary, but this is pretty standard, at least for the West Coast, and pretty much essentially United States. I'm not familiar with the East Coast, but I don't think this varies that greatly across the country, but it might. So, your mileage may vary. Take this as a rough guideline. So because being a general contractor is a huge job, why on earth would someone do this? Why would they take on this extra responsibility of sort of coordinating and organizing the building process? And what happens is a general contractor will be 15 to 20% of the cost of your project. So if you have a $500,000 total budget, the general contractor will be $75,000 to $100,000. And what happens is people look at that and they go, wow, if I act as the general contractor, quote unquote, I will save $100,000, right? So now we're going to go on a slight digression on the notion of spending and saving. And I think this is one of those, I've had this argument with people for years, decades, literally, and it's this bizarre concept that has been beaten into us by advertising our entire lives. But when you save money, it means you don't spend it. So by definition, the money you've saved is the money you have not spent. When you spend money, you are unsaving it. Spending money is the opposite of saving. And so what people say they're doing is they say, oh, I have a $500,000 budget. If I get rid of the general contractor and do that myself, I'm going to save $100,000. But they're not going to save $100,000 because they're going to spend $500,000, probably more. Everybody blows through their budget traditionally. But what they mean is, I want to spend that money differently. But we have this saving spending problem in our minds. So if you go to the store and some whatever you're going to buy pants and they're on sale, they were $20 and you buy them for $10, you did not save $10. You spent $10. You saved no money. You did not save any money. You only spent money because you had some X amount of money. You spent $10 for the pants, so you have X minus 10. That is unsaved $10. If you had saved money, you would have had a certain amount of money and you would have put more money in. It would have been X plus whatever you saved. So then you would have, say, if you saved $10 and you would go from, say, $100 to $110. But if you spend money, you go from $100 to $90. The fact that the pants may or may not have cost more at some other place or some other time in some other space is completely irrelevant. Either you have more money at the end or less money. If you have less money, you spent money. If you have more money, you saved money. And I know this sounds sort of simple and stupid, but again, I've had this argument many times. This is not what we've been told, which is also why, despite all the money we've saved, we're often quite broke. But by the way, businesses do not think of it this way. They do not have this is not confusing to them. They have costs of operations, expenses, return on investment. They never think about saving. If you think about something like this, you go, oh, if I spend $1 for something and I sell it for $5, you also did not save money. You made $4. There was no savings there. You spent $1 and you sold it for $5. So you made $4. Now, if you put that into savings, you would have made $4. Now, that's an investment, which is fine, but this is not savings. And why this is important to think about correctly is because people generally have a budget, whatever that is, an imaginary budget. In this case, let's say $500,000, which sounds like an incredible amount of money, but let me assure you, for building a house, particularly in the West Coast, this is not an incredible amount of money. It's actually sort of probably vastly too small amount of money. But just for making the math easy, they go, oh, I can save $100,000. What they mean is, I'm going to spend $100,000 for something else. And that's why it's important, is to ask yourself the question, is what I'm spending the $100,000 on worth the difficulty, challenge, and sort of vexation, paperwork, and risk, by the way, the fair amount of risk that I'm taking on, because you're not spending less money. You're just spending the same amount of money in different ways. And then back to the house and home example, what happens is people say, and I've heard this many times, oh, that way I'll get more house for my money. The problem is you do not want more house. I know what people mean, but if you actually listen to what they say, more house, like bigger, is bigger better? Obviously, right? When you say it that way, of course, we go, no. What is the more that you want? And that's why I emphasize so significantly in the first lecture that if you know what you want and and can articulate the kind of emotions and feelings and sensibilities and materials that you want to work with, then you can say, oh yes, it is worth, I can trade that cost of being the contractor and all the work and struggle that I'm going to take on and substitute that so that I can take that same amount of money, and instead of spending it on that, I'm going to spend it on, an incredibly nice front door, right? Or, something, a bigger, maybe the property you could get would be more in line with your values, or, I don't know what it could be, any number of things. But to know that that's the trade-off you're making, rather than talk about, which is usually, again, people make this, they say they're saving money or they're cutting costs, but they really aren't. What they're doing is they're just transferring one part of their budget to another, and just know that what you're doing is you're taking all the help, guidance, cost reduction, uh, uh, specialty, capacities of a contractor and risk reduction, and you're taking all that on in exchange for something. And that, again, that trade might be great, but this isn't a monetary exchange. This doesn't have anything to do with money, really. It feels like it does, but it really doesn't. It's a matter of taking on responsibility and learning and being able to participate more fully and really engaging a challenge versus paying someone to help you do that process and make sure that it goes more smoothly and probably in a more cost-effective manner. So that's sort of the trade-off that we're talking about. But to make that trade-off in an informed way, and why it probably, by the way, doesn't quote-unquote transfer as much money as you want into the other things you might expect, is because I think people often misunderstand what contractors do. And they do two different things that I think, at least, that are hugely important to understand. And if you understand those, you'll again hopefully avoid vexation if you decide to take on that role. One thing that they do is they act as a cash flow mechanism. So when you get a contractor, he'll generally sign a contract with the bank to build a particular house, the house that you've agreed with, your architectural plans, all that. And then he gets to work, right? The crews get to work, the whatever, the company gets to work and starts things rolling. And you don't worry so much about the cash flow. You have to generally come up with a bunch of cash up front to get the process started. Usually you need 20% down. So again, we're just going to imaginary $500,000 house. You'll need $100,000 down because the bank will usually only fund about 80%. And then they'll probably want you to have some other cash reserves around, like mortgage payments and these kinds of things for a certain number of months. So I'm just going to make up a number and say, in this case, that you need $125,000 to get the project going. So that gets everything rolling and the contractor takes care of it. And the contractor is usually invisibly to the homeowner cash flowing this behind the scenes. And you don't see this. If you become the contractor, you will definitely see this. And so in many places where I live, and I think pretty much all over the West Coast and all over the place, generally, banks will not give you the first check towards paying towards the construction of the house until they inspect the foundation. So you have to pour the concrete foundation. If that's the kind of foundation you're going to use, the most standard could be a floating, could be slab, could be pier, many number of ways to do this, but usually involves a lot of concrete. And the bank will say, okay, until that is done and inspected by our people, and it has to be inspected usually by your local jurisdiction to make sure it's done correctly, and the bank usually sends somebody out to inspect, they will not cut you a check. So all of the work to get to there has to be paid for by the homeowner if they're going to be their own contractor, which can be a significant amount of money depending on how much groundwork, how much permitting you have to do, if you have to do electrical tie-in before you're allowed to start the pour, all of these things have to happen. And then, of course, you have to have the team come out and put the foundation in. And that all has to be paid for. Now, you might have a 30-day window to pay for some of this. Often because you're owner builder and they don't know, you'll often require half up front. And this all takes time. And so then you put out a bunch of money, and then they come and they inspect, and then they go, okay, now you're X far into the project, we'll cut you a check for 20%, say, however far, different banks have different measures of how far you are in the project, and they'll cut you that percentage of the check of your cost. And this would be in the budget that you would give to the bank. Don't want to go into too many details in there, but they would say, okay, you've done $40,000 worth of work, so here's $40,000, just random number. Another problem there. So first you have to cash flow all that, but then if you have to wait until there's an inspection and then the bank gives you the check and then you deposit the check before you get ready for the next step, which would be framing, perhaps usually, there could be other things, but probably framing. Well, now you're in trouble because if you're going to say frame your house, you have to order your framing package, which is all the wood, maybe rafters, joists, depending on how much engineering wood you're using. And that takes a little lead time. Well, if you have a complex, expensive, or highly engineered build, maybe a long lead time, particularly if you're not in a major metropolitan area where they have a lot of this, just sitting around. And so, okay, you've got your pour done. Now it takes, say, a week to get your inspection and then maybe just a week to get your check. So let's just say 14 days from the time you get your pour to you get your check. And then you get your check, and then you go, okay, now I need to order my framing package. Let's say that takes a week to get delivered, which would be amazing, but let's say 2 weeks. So what you've done is you've introduced a potential of a 3 or a 4 week delay, like a month delay, if you do not have the ready cash to keep the project rolling while you wait for the bank to begin making payments. So not only do you need a bunch more money up front, you need even more money than that so that the project just keeps moving. Now, if you're a contractor, you have accounts with these various companies that you're ordering materials from. They know you. They have 30, 60, 90-day credit lines up to a certain amount. You have other jobs going on that are bringing in cash. And so they have this flywheel going where they have accounts that allow them to pay under different time frames, and they have cash coming in from other jobs, and they generally have large lines of credit so that they can keep this whole thing moving. By the way, this is one reason contractors are very sensitive to time, because they are usually involved in, say, 2 or 3 different builds that have 2 or 3 different payment schedules, and they have different lines of credit and different credited, lumber, cement contractors, their subs, all this, all going at once. And so delays to them mean, I'm going to have to make a payment from a line of credit that maybe cost me more money than if I could have gotten that check from the bank that would have kept this going. And so again, this is why when they look at a project, they want something they can build efficiently and on time, because that flow, that keeping that flywheel spinning is how they make their living, essentially. This is what they do. So they're, that's why they're incredibly sensitive, or they should be. Good builders are incredibly sensitive to these problems. As a homeowner who's trying to do this, you probably aren't going to have these lines of credits. You probably aren't going to have these relationships, and you probably won't have this huge line of credit sitting there so that you can make that go. And so you sort of have to keep putting up large amounts of money, often largest amounts of money that most people will ever deal with, to keep the whole process from stalling. Because once it stalls, of course, delay costs money. It costs money because you're paying the bank. It costs money because you're living someplace that you're probably paying for while you wait to get into the house that you're trying to build. It extends the period of frustration. And so it's very easy to get into these cash jams when people try to be owner builders if they don't understand, I don't need $100,000 to make this project fly. I probably need more like, maybe 40%, maybe like 200,000. Because if you ever run out of cash and you're in this window where the bank isn't going to cut you a check, right? Then you generally could get a lot of delays. And again, delays are expensive. So one part of it is understanding how all this cash flows. Another part, and this is where we get to the medieval part of construction, is the contractor will have relationships with many different subcontractors, of which, again, I mentioned there's, a dozen at least on a project. And they've probably worked with many of them for years. So they have long established relationships with all of the players in every step of this, of the complex process of putting a house together in this medieval sort of guild system. And this is part of the challenge of organizing this. When you don't have these relationships, it's hard to know who's really good, who's really reliable, who's, going to overcharge you for things. It's hard to have a good sense of what things should cost. It's hard to know where costs are being hidden. So the opportunity for making errors goes up dramatically. And you also lose the ability to negotiate effectively. And negotiate is maybe the wrong word. To interact in a sort of communal manner. Because when you have these long-term relationships, let's say the electrical contractor is supposed to come in, you've got the framing is started, electrical contract schedule be in, one of his people is sick and another job got delayed. So you have say 3 days of electrical work at your house that's going to get pushed back for a week because the electrical contractor, through no fault of their own, is just jammed up. So now you have to call, say, the sheetrock people who were supposed to come in after the electrical was done, first fix, and go, okay, now I need to delay them. And they're like, hey, okay, fine, we can be delayed, but we're going to do this other job that's going to take 2 weeks, so we're not going to be able to get back to you. And again, it's very easy for these delays to just ripple out. If you've had relationships with these people for a long time, or if you've known many of them, you have more options. One is you might call them up and say, hey, I need this job done. I need it done today or this week. It's really going to screw me over. So, make it happen. Like, let's just make this happen. And I saw, particularly on one job, where there was going to be a delay. And then one afternoon at like 3:00, this team of, 8 framers showed up from, I have no idea where. I was doing outside work. And I mean, they must have worked until, I think, 10 o'clock that night till the neighbors got mad. They were there at like 5 the next morning, pissing off the neighbors again. And they got this thing framed so fast, and they were gone by, I think, noon the following day. And so what they had done is just taken like people from another job, and when they got off from that job, put them on this job. They worked as long as they could till they pissed off the other job, and then they went back, right? And this happens, and this kept this project on track, and probably didn't delay the other project too much. And the crew got a little bit of extra overtime. So everybody's happy. Buy them some beer, take them out to dinner, give them a little overtime, apologize to the other clients, and then everything's back on track. Okay. And this happens consistently, just because there's so many moving parts and it's so complex. If you don't have those relationships, if you don't have those favors to call, it's easy for delays again to ramify. Now, the nice thing is, if you know this going in, you can be nice to yourself and just give yourself extra time and go, okay, I need to make my windows a little bigger, relax about time, and understand that it's going to take me a little more time to get bids back. It's going to take me a little more time to schedule things, probably going to be not quite as reliable as they would be, for somebody else. I might have a little more challenge, so on and so forth. Also, it'll probably be a little more expensive. So some of the money, quote unquote, you think you're saving, you're probably unsaving, because again, the chances of getting the best bids is going to be difficult, because that's, again, part of these negotiated relationships. If I know if I give you a good bid, I'm likely to work with you on 3 more houses in the next year. That's a different bid than somebody who's coming in for a one-off. And I go, okay, I don't know what this relationship's going to be like. I'm worried about getting paid. Are they going to cause problems? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm going to charge a little more just so that I'm comfortable. And so, again, some of the money you feel like you might be, quote unquote, saving is in fact not going to be there. And again, delays are expensive. But if you're expecting them and you know they're coming, much easier to manage for, easier to keep your sense of priorities, and just to understand that these delays are likely. So those are the 2 key elements for the challenges that they create. And again, what it does is it pits you against yourself, because you have your, I want to finish, I want to stay on budget, I want to be efficient, and I need to do this mountain of paperwork that goes along with this, versus your self that's trying to do an art project that says, I want something beautiful, I want something amazing, I want something that fulfills my values, and I don't want to have to be fighting about all of these details all the time. The plus side of this, and the reason I think it's good for people to do this if they want to, having understood the process, having recognized, by the way, that contractors work a lot, and so you're taking on at minimum 30-hour-a-week job when you decide to do this, which is great. But there's a lot of benefits that can come from this. Again, and I don't think of saving money as one of them. One of the benefits is you get to work with the subcontractors. So on one hand, this can be a challenge. On the other hand, I think it's a great opportunity. Even people who just build a house often have this experience. It's like, oh my gosh, I got to work with the people who put in the hardwood floors, or I got to work with the landscape people, or the cement contractors. Maybe if we had a complex foundation, you might end up interacting with them. You're like, hey, these are some good people. These are interesting. I learned a lot from them. But when you're acting as the contractor, you get an opportunity to interact with them more directly, and an opportunity to learn a lot and see them working, and often gain a great appreciation for the amount of skill that can be going into modern construction, particularly custom construction, and that you really are working with these guilds, right? It is how often do we get to travel back to the Middle Ages and work with craftsmen and guildsmen who specialize in tile work or kitchen countertops and all the crazy tools and approaches and tricks and techniques that they have for producing quality at a fairly good clip. It can be quite amazing, again, particularly as you go into more custom work, to see the kinds of things people can do on site. And it's kind of extraordinary. They'll create little fabrication labs and make metal work, or pour curved foundations or things. You're like, wow, these are some impressive folks that are working. And to have that opportunity to interact with which often people don't anymore, because again, what else do we do that is vaguely medieval? I think can be one of the great joys of building a house. And it's traditional when houses go well that people will often hold a party for all the crew that worked on it. And I think it's a good tradition because, again, and when it goes well, usually you think, wow, I know it costs a lot and you spend a lot of money and you pay all those sorts of things. But there's sort of like, wow, when it's done, this amazing thing was done, and you can't hardly quite figure out how all of it added up, right? Like, it is sort of amazing and can be astounding, particularly if your vision is approached. You're like, okay, for all the struggle and pain and difficulties, like, here it is. And, a lot of people were necessary and contributed to making it possible. And so I think there is that aspect of it that can be quite fantastic. Also, there is something about just learning about the process and getting into it and sort of knowing your house from the inside out and going, oh, I made all these decisions about wiring and wallboard and the kinds of paint and the kinds of, all this sort of things that you might not have made so directly or had to really break down the details of, that you will have to do if you become your own contractor. And to do that at such an intimate level, again, just sort of raises your skill level, raises your awareness. It's a new challenge. It's a new opportunity to expand what you can do and the experiences you can have in the world. And, even if it doesn't quote unquote save you as much money as you're hoping, or you can't transfer that money to do something else, how much is it worth to learn this? How much is it worth to gain these skills and this knowledge and this experience? Hopefully a lot, right? Enough for you to go through the pain and struggle and suffering associated with large, complex problems involving lots of people and a fair amount of money. And I think this is easy to undervalue, but don't, because I think it's super important. And then the next lecture, where I talk about people who really take on this sort of full alternative building, usually self-funded, the crazy sort of model. It's sort of that version gone mad, right? Turned up to 100. And so it's a lot just to build a house and work with an architect and make the whole process go. It's a lot more when you decide to embrace part of this. And one of the parts, again, that people tend to like to embrace is being your own contractor. And it can be amazing. It can be this experience that allows you to grow and evolve and challenge yourself and learn about your own shortcomings, your capacity. But if you approach it with the knowledge of the shortfalls and the challenges, then I think it has a very much greater chance of being successful, and again, of being much less frustrating than it might be otherwise. And the last note on that front is to ponder, if you're thinking about this, or even in this, by the way, you can apply this to other large, complex problems, is to ask yourself, is this the kind of skills I want to acquire? Are these the kind of challenges I really want to take on? Is this the most important thing for me? I don't want to just have a house. I don't want to just work with an architect on creating a design for a house. I want to participate much more directly in actually making this come into existence. And that means you have to say, all right, I'm going to stop doing a lot of the things I'm doing now, assuming you're not doing nothing. And is this the best way I can spend my life for the next, year, 2 years, 3 years, depending on where you are on the project. And then on the timeline, probably 2 years would be a quick minimum for that. probably 3 years would be more realistic, and say, okay, do I want to ramp up in this process for the next 2 to 3 years and really dedicate myself to that? And that seems to be something that'll be interesting and be joyful. And I've seen people do this and they love it and they think it's one of the greatest things they've done. And I've seen people do this and just bail at like the 9-month mark or the year mark and go, oh, good Lord, this is insane. What was I thinking? If I see one more spreadsheet or have to try and cost out, torque screws again, I'm going to kill myself, right? Like, it can be either end of that frustration. But if you can look at yourself and sit down and go, yeah, that's a new challenge. That would be something I would like to do. This is, some people want to climb mountains. Some people want to learn Persian. Some people want to do other things. And I think I want to try this. And it's like, hey, but then who cares about then again, the money is probably the least important part of that question. Because you might decide like, yeah, participating in very directly in making my dream become a physical reality in the place that's going to be my home. I mean, wow, that's astounding. And in that process, you'll involve your friends and family and community and all of these trades. And so there is a big chance that you won't only find out more about yourself, but you will have this communal effect because it's a communal project. And so you'll be involving more people. You'll be in a relationship with a bank. You'll be in a relationship with friends who might help you, or bookkeepers, or all the subs, and the people who can give you knowledge. And wow, boom, there you go. Your life just got a lot bigger, more complicated, probably, more challenging, maybe a bit unnerving, but bigger and interesting and more communal, because it's a communal project. Again, this is the magic of the medieval in the modern world, is it will be a communal project, and if you can embrace that, and that sounds great, then it's something to consider. But to bring it full circle, don't think of it as saving money, because it's not a money-saving process. It's a shifting of priorities and an opportunity to participate in a different way. And if that sounds great for you, spectacular. If that sounds nightmarish and terrible to you, that's good too, because that's what the money is for. If you have it to do the build, to say, okay, I want to embrace this process, but I don't want to embrace it that much, right? This will drive me crazy. Or I'm better to spend my time making more money to help fund this insanely expensive process than I am to stop working or interfere with my regular work so that I can do this. These are all decisions. Ask yourself, reflect on yourself. But there's no reason not to do it. It's an amazing challenge. It's complex, but it's not impossible. Lots of people have done it, and it can be a hugely personally enriching challenge to see it, throw yourself into it, and then make something in the physical world. And I keep mentioning the physical world because I think this is something that we lost a lot of, right? If we work in offices, or we work with computers, or we work with digital material a lot, it's very easy to miss that it is kind of nice to do things that inhabit our world, that you can touch and feel and smell and see and show to people. It's really great. It can be very rewarding and fulfilling in small ways and big ways. And a house is a pretty damn big thing. And if you can do that and have it be in the world and have participated in that and see that, wow, this was my dream, maybe imperfectly realized, but boy, my dream, even an imperfectly realized physical incarnation of your dream, it can be just absolutely spectacular. So thank you very much.